frat house. How are you all doing? This video is late. Oh my goodness, I had to go out of town for a couple of days, and when I got back everything just went kablooey. And I was talking to Rhomany about it, and she's like, now you know what Ryder says about responding versus reacting. And I said, that's what I've been trying to do. That was why I put the video on hold. There were family things that had to take priority, so those things took priority, and now we're running behind. So my plan is, fingers crossed, that I can get through this video without having to edit any of it. And it's a doozy, you guys. I already know I've got pages of notes, so this might be a video you want to take breaks in. If you're one that wants to watch for 5 or 10 minutes and take a break, I completely get that. I understand. I feel ya. Feel free to do so, because section 3 of this book, it's my favorite section. It's a lot. It is a lot of information, so I've tried to condense as much as I can, and I can tell you right now, my intention is to come back to this section in more detail, like in August and September. There's a lot here that I'd like to explore and kind of get into in a little more, in depth. So I'm gonna do my best to keep this video short, give you a good overview of what section 3 is about, and then come back in more detail down the road, if that makes sense. So if you'd be interested in that, let me know down in the comments, because there are a gazillion things I feel like in this section that we could really delve into. Section 3 is the practice, and if section 2 was kind of the nuts and bolts, like I said, that's how section 2 felt to me, was the nuts and bolts. Section 3 to me feels like mindset. It feels like you know, purpose and meaning and things like that, that you have as a foundation for those nuts and bolts, if that makes sense. So let's see, we're talking page 123, and Ryder Carroll says, getting organized is an important step toward assuming responsibility for the precious little time and energy that we're given. And to me, and he does have a diagram in here that kind of explains this really well. Being organized, like taking this step to organize everything, basically, it kind of puts a stopgap between the things that happen to you and how you react to them. There are so many built-in pauses in this method, and I've personally been finding that really useful. And I know that my use of this method is going to change, just because I believe Ryder has said himself, you know, give yourself 2 or 3 months to really settle into the rhythm of this method, right? So I know the way I'm using it is going to change, but that's been something I've noticed right away, is there are very purposeful pauses now built into my day that I didn't have before, and those are incredibly important, especially the way last week looked. Those were incredibly important to me, to have those pauses purposely built into the system and the method of my bullet journal. So then I'm going to go to page 127, is called Beginning, and he's talking about fear in life, and he says, don't let fear dilute your life. And I love that. I know personally there have been a ton of things that I haven't done in my life completely out of fear, and I don't, you know, want to regret not having taken those risks or tried new things or whatever because I was afraid, right? He says it's our responsibility to learn, take action, and grow. We can't control the outcome, so there's fear because it's a risk, but you need to believe that you're worth the risk. So that's why I like this section. It's got a lot of, like, not only just kind of mindset things, but like don't doubt yourself type of messages in it. And then he talks about how thoughts are the start of everything. That's page 130. Thoughts are the source of our goals, hopes, dreams, and ultimately our actions. An easy place to start with any endeavor is simply taking your thoughts out of your head and organizing them on paper, because just doing that alone gives you a built-in pause, right? The next section is reflection. This is my favorite thing about bullet journal, is reflection. This is what has changed my process the most, is I don't do like a daily review or a weekly review. There's something in my brain about calling it reflection versus review that completely shifts my mindset. It's a whole new paradigm for me. Gonna do a separate video about that, okay? But starting on page 131 is reflection, and throughout this section I'm kind of balancing like my bullet journal and the book here in my lap because I didn't grab a table because I'm smart. So page 133, he says reflection is the nursery of intentionality. Through reflection, we cultivate the habit of checking in with ourselves to examine our progress, our responsibilities, our circumstances, and our state of mind. And that is why this has been such a game changer for me. And it's only been a couple of weeks. You know, I'm sure I'm not as fully immersed in that process as I could be, because it's going to have to become just more a habitual part of my day and part of the week and whatnot. But already that looking at things as reflection versus review has made a huge difference to me. And then he talks about the whole purpose of reflection is it helps you identify what nourishes you, because we all go through seasons, right? And I think it's on, top of page 134, he talks about in different seasons, you know, some things grow in one season that rot in another season. So reflection being kind of the nursery of intentionality, it helps you identify what does nourish you. And then he gets further into this later on. He talks about how there are different mechanisms that improve our perception, so that when we are reflecting, that our perception of what nourishes us is good. And there's a whole list of things: meaning, goals, small steps, time, gratitude, control, radiance, endurance, deconstruction, inertia, and imperfection. That's why this is such a beast of a section. There's just a lot here, but it's all so good. I just am totally enthralled with this whole section. The whole thing for me, and he calls it this in the book about reflection, is asking the small whys. And that kind of kept bringing me back to, you know, those series of videos that I did a couple years ago about what's your why not. You know, what's the thing that you want to do in your life? What do you feel called to? You know, he talks about being curious about things. What sparks your curiosity, and what do you get excited about looking into or researching or talking to other people about or experiencing that you want more of in your life? And so that when people will be like, why are you interested in that, or why would you want to do that, that you should be so confident in yourself and what drives you and what you are driven towards that you would say, well, why not? And that's why I called it What's Your Why Not? And he's talking about being able to identify those things here. Ask the small whys during reflection. Ask the small whys, because that helps you recognize what nourishes you. Turning my notes here. Page 141 is meaning. Oh, you know what? I'm actually going to skip back a bit. I apologize. He talks about AM reflection, PM reflection, and then monthly and yearly reflection through migration. So monthly or yearly when you're migrating things, reflection is kind of built into that. And this is something else we're going to talk about in a separate video, is about friction. He says, migration is designed to add the friction you need to slow down, step back, and consider the things you task yourself with. On the surface, it's an automatic filtering mechanism designed to leverage your limited patience. If something is not worth the few seconds it takes to rewrite it, the chances are it's not really important. In addition, handwriting triggers our critical thinking, helping us draw new connections between thoughts. As you migrate each item, you give yourself a chance to identify unconventional relationships or opportunities by holding each item under the microscope of your intention. And that is something else we'll talk about a little bit later today, is identifying unconventional relationships. So reflection serves a lot of purposes. It helps you to ask the small whys. It helps you to focus on what does feed you, what nourishes you, what's important, what you are really after in life, okay? So I apologize a little bit for the jumping around here, but we are doing a little bit of jumping around. Okay, now we're on to meaning, which is on page 141. And he talks about, you know, happiness. A lot of people talk about, you know, I'm not happy, I want to be happy, I should be happy, I'm not happy. You know, our society tends to chase happiness, right? And he says maybe we should be chasing what is meaningful, because chasing what is meaningful will yield happiness. And he gives several reasons for this. We tend to overestimate, you know, how long the good feeling of being happy is going to last, you know, things like that. A lot of detail in here about that in the meaning chapter. And he talks about what shines forth for you. None of us can know with any true certainty what will make us happy because of impact bias, the tendency for people to overestimate the length or the intensity of future feeling states. In essence, we chronically underestimate our ability to adapt. That's on page 143. So he talks about asking ourselves how to be instead. Maybe we have it all backward, is how he puts it on page 146. So if we take our focus off of chasing being happy and chase being meaningful instead, that we would end up being happy anyway. Like happiness is a byproduct of chasing what is meaningful. Top of page 147, there's a little kind of inset comment that says, your senses will witness what shines forth, that which holds the promise of meaning. And this is where he starts talking about curiosity. And that was what reminded me of kind of the What's Your Why Not videos. That curiosity, if you chase what makes you curious, that is where you might find meaning in the things that you're doing. And then he does an exercise in the book where it's like a tale of two lives. That's on page 148 through 149. So I do highly recommend that exercise. It can be really eye-opening. Starting on page 150 is the chapter on goals. And I love that he calls your list of goals your list of potential futures. And that kind of derives from that exercise that was in the meaning section. And I love that he calls it that. Your goals list is the list of your potential futures, right? Because if you're going to chase those goals, that's what you're putting your time into. So that path is your potential future, or this one, or whatever the case may be. Let's see. He talks about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. So he walks you through this in detail. I'm not going to go through it in detail here because we have a lot to get through, but it starts on page 153. So basically you make out this list of your goals and then you break them down or separate them by putting some into how many will take 5 years, 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, and 1 hour, okay? And then talks about, okay, you can do the 1 hour ones quickly, right? You can even do the 2 day ones pretty quickly. So those are short-term goals. Go ahead and get them out of the way because that leaves room for the longer-term goals, the mid-term goals. So he explains it very well. It's starting, like I said, on page 153 into 155. And then he talks about, you know, as you sort your goals into this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, you might find that there are some things that you don't want to put in any of those categories. Okay, so maybe that's not a goal you should have, right? If it's not something, I can see it being different if you're struggling with how long is this goal going to take me, where do I put it? But if you're just like, I don't want to put it anywhere, then it probably shouldn't be a goal. And he talks about not hesitating to strike goals off your list because that leaves times for the goals that really do matter to you. Okay, let's see, page 156. He's talking a little bit about, I almost said micromanaging, and that's not what I mean. Multitasking. He's talking about multitasking and how you have attention residue. So when you leave one task and move on to the next one, a lot of times some of your attention is still kind of attached to the task that you may consciously feel you left and you're moved on to this one, but you haven't really. So he talks a little bit about that on page 156 because that does kind of break into your productivity. You're not giving full attention to the current task because of attention residue. The other thing I really loved about the goals section was him talking about sprints. That is something else we're going to explore more in a later video. It basically is a tool for breaking down larger goals that keeps you from becoming fatigued or overwhelmed. So if you break a goal down, you know how we'll take a large project or a large goal and break it down into smaller steps, then break those down into smaller steps, then you keep going until a goal or a project is broken down into really easily manageable, attainable goals, right? Tasks that you can complete, very small, you chip away at it, right? You just chip away. The difference with sprints is that they're very self-contained goals. So as you take a large goal and break it down, the sprints are really self-contained. They're things that you can do. They're like subset goals or skills that you need to achieve the long-term goal. And I'm gonna let you guys read into that. Like I said, it starts on page 155 and goes into, quite a ways, like 161. And the point is that when you're chasing a long-term goal, there is this risk that you're going to get tired of chasing it, right? You're going to get fatigued or you're going to feel overwhelmed if it's a very large goal. Sprints break them down into very modular pieces so that this is like a sub-goal and this is a sub-goal, and it's manageable, it has start date, it has an end date, right? So he talks about there are 5 requirements, wow, for setting up sprints. Number 1, they should have no major barriers to entry. So there shouldn't be anything preventing you from starting your sprint, right? And he gives a really great, and I'm sorry, there are not 5, there are 3. There are 3 sprint requirements. He uses this great example of learning how to cook, okay? So I will let you guys go into that in here. So number 1 is nothing preventing you from starting your sprint. Number 2 is your sprint should consist of very clearly defined actionable tasks. Number 3 is your sprint should have a fixed, relatively short time frame for completion. It should take less than a month to complete, ideally a week or 2. So that is page 159 to 160. And then he goes into brainstorming. So in order to break down your goal, you kind of have to get your head wrapped around how you're going to break this goal down. How does this work? So he talks about brainstorming. I either do really well with brainstorming or I completely fall on my face with brainstorming. I don't seem to have a real middle ground. I think that's might just be my brain. I saw a great YouTube video, I will link it down below, by Rachel Stephen. It's how to brainstorm ideas for writing. I personally find the process applicable to just brainstorming in general. So I highly recommend that video. It is, like I said, it's tailored toward writing, but the process itself, I think you can apply toward just brainstorming about anything in general. So I will link that down below. He also lists 5 questions that you can ask yourself, which kind of does play into the way that Rachel Stephen talks about brainstorming. It's like brainstorming, but it's guided, if that makes sense. So those questions are on page 161. Let's see, and it goes on to talk about sprints, and I have so much stuff highlighted in here, you guys, but I want to keep this video like manageable. Let's see, and the other thing, then he talks about several things that sprints do for you. You know, you want to block them out on your calendar. As you progress through your sprints, the way he puts it is progress provides momentum. Momentum helps you cultivate patience, which is really important. Super important, especially for a long-term goal. You get that little, ooh, I finished that sprint. It's a little bit of a boost to boost you into the next sprint, and that's one step closer you are toward completing that long-term goal. He also says dividing larger goals into sprints also acts as damage control. If one sprint doesn't work out, you realize it's not for you, or you come across information that throws a wrench into the gears. If you planned your sprint well, shutting it down won't derail you from related sprints, and at worst, you may have to shuffle around your schedule a bit. Whether they're successful or not, sprints provide you with room for reflection, because as you complete each sprint and as you're reviewing your things, right, as you are reflecting at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, you can just pause and look at that project or that goal and go, okay. And then he has 4 questions. You know, what am I learning about my strengths or my weaknesses? What's working? What isn't working? What could I do a bit better next time? Was value added to my life? And he says maybe you figure out you have to, you know, refine that long-term goal. Maybe it needs to be adjusted. Good. That's good that you learn that now rather than getting all the way to that goal, right? He says course correction just means you've uncovered something even more meaningful, and that's the point. And that is such a great mindset to have, because a lot of times if you have a goal and then you achieve it and it's not everything you'd hoped it would be, that is so hard. That can be so hard for us to swallow, right? So this way you're kind of course correcting as you go on your path toward that long-term goal. The next section is called Small Steps. That starts on page 166. And he talks about iteration. This automatically made me think of math. You guys know I love math. I know a lot of you may think that makes me crazy, and I completely understand that. But he talks about iteration, the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, and act. So you can integrate this, and this is how these small steps work into the bullet journal method, is they keep you consistent. And he says productivity is in large part a derivative of consistency. So this idea of every day, plan, do, check, act. You plan during your AM reflection, you do during the day, and checking and acting happen during your evening reflection, right? As you are reviewing what you got done that day, going over what worked and what didn't, what parts toward a certain goal you got toward, what worked, what didn't. Maybe you course correct a little bit, you stay on your path, right? So that is the Deming cycle. That's on page 171 and 172, I believe. Yeah, and even into 173. Oh, let's see. We need to turn our page on our notes again. The next section is time. That starts on page 175. And he talks about flow. And we've talked about this before in videos about deep planning, that I love the idea of having your planner, whether it's a bullet journal or not, having your planning system set up in a way that best works for your brain and most quickly or is most likely to get you into that flow state while you are working on something. I'm really into this whole idea of prepping your tools so that you are most likely to hit that flow state, because that's where we get the most done. It's like flow is when your mind is so consumed with a task that it cannot consciously process the experience of self. We're fully engaged. We're totally present. We unlock our full productive and creative potential. This is on page 177. The trick is it can't be forced. So if you're strategic with your use of time, we can create the conditions where flow is most likely to occur. So knowing it's a lot of things, at least in my opinion, it's a lot of things. What time of day is your brain working at its best potential? What surrounding conditions need to be going on? Do you have the things you need set up that work in a way to get you to the flow state as efficiently as possible? And that's a lot of what he's talking about in the time section. So, and the whole key with flow is balancing the challenge of a task with your skill level. Okay, so not having to take time to find where you are in a certain project, or you know, having to switch gears planner-wise or mental-wise or whatever the case may be, that being able to balance the challenge of a task with your skill level with that task is going to, it's one of the pieces that'll get you into flow a lot quicker. So he talks about time boxing. That's on page 178. And that's, he explains that very well, so I'm going to leave that there. And then we get to page 183, which is gratitude. And he talks about the next time you cross off a task in your bullet journal, slow down, take a moment to pause and reflect on the impact of your accomplishment. And again, there are built-in pauses. And I will tell you guys that there have been days, this last week and a half has been so chaotic, just because of outside things that were not planned for, that had to be handled. And so the things I did get done that I like had on my list to get done for days, because other things kept superseding those things, I took a lot of joy in crossing off the fact that I actually got the towels done, or I actually got the socks put away, or all the dishes were done after supper, because I could take joy in those small things, because so many other things were going on that were throwing everything else into a bit of chaos, that I'm gonna take joy in getting those things done. And I'm grateful that those things got done. He points out we need 5 compliments to balance out 1 negative comment, and that practicing gratitude counteracts negativity. So if you think about how many negative things you say to yourself during the day about yourself, that for every one of those things you have to give yourself 5 positive comments to counteract just 1 of those negative comments. And we think really quickly, guys. Our brains work really fast. So I don't know about you guys, but I know I have days where it's a lot of, oh, I didn't do this and I didn't do that, and get your act together and blah, 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 and you know, and that is so counterproductive. So practicing gratitude helps you see positivity in your day. So if you take time during your evening reflection, even if it's a minute, and just write 1 line, 1 thing I was grateful for today, you start to see more positive things, and you shift your mindset as to how you talk to yourself. Okay? And one practice I've tried, there's something very loud. It's a very odd sounding plane. It was a biplane. Sorry about that. I know I get in that habit of really being down on myself, and I try to tell myself, okay, the way I'm talking to myself right now, would I ever talk like that to anybody else? Like, would I ever say those things to anyone else? No, I would never talk to somebody else like that. Well, then why is it okay for me to talk to myself like that? It's not. It's not okay. And he talks about, you know, celebrating on page 185, and how celebrating small wins can produce dramatic improvements in our self-perception or attitude. We tend to ruminate over all the things we got wrong. I do that a lot. Unaware of or ignoring all the things we got right. So it ties kind of into that when you're searching for happiness. You know, if you're always seeing the negative in yourself, then you're not going to be happy probably, because you have this negative filter on, right? So he talks about, you know, gratitude practice, and I did put a gratitude section into my bullet journal for August, so that is going to be a video probably for next week, beginning of August. I'll show you the August setup in the bullet journal. Let's see, page 189 is about control. So this is where he talks about responding versus reacting, being intentional with your responses to problems. On page 193, he says, trying to think our way out of situations beyond our control may feel productive, but it's nothing more than a powerful distraction. And holy cow, that is highlighted. I have stars next to it. I wrote it in my notes. I have stars next to it in my notes, because that is what I personally do. trying to think your way out of a situation that's beyond my control makes me feel incredibly productive, because I feel like if I think at it long enough, I'll figure it out. Sometimes that is the case. I'm not going to say it's not always the case, but when it comes to things in your life that are not in your control, trying to throw thinking at it to solve it when it's not a solvable situation is just wasted energy. It's a big old distraction. That's all it is. So rather than trying to think something to death when it's a situation you can't control anyway, you're worrying, basically. You're worrying yourself to death. So instead of doing that, he suggests identify what is and what is not in your control by seeing if your tasks are focused on outcome rather than process. And holy wow, this spoke to me in a huge way. I have a whole section here, highlighted, bracketed. I've got notes in the book about it, in the notebook. So he says, trying to identify what is and was not in your control. An easy tell is if your tasks are focused on outcome rather than process. So the examples he gives, if your tasks are give awesome presentation, lose 10 pounds, read 5 books. And he says those goals provide direction. They focus on outcomes that are ultimately out of our control. Breaking your goals down into small actionable steps like memorize presentation instead of give awesome presentation. No soda on Sunday instead of lose 10 pounds. Set aside reading time instead of read 5 books. That, seeing those two examples put up against each other really helped me see where I kind of set myself up for failure as far as actionable tasks. I tend to fall into that first category of lose 10 pounds. And then my mind just kind of goes, how? I will struggle sometimes with taking those things and turning them into very small actionable tasks. Well, the example he gives is no, don't just write down lose weight. No pop on Sunday. Okay, you can tell I'm from the Midwest, we call it pop here. If you want to read 5 books, okay, well maybe you schedule in a day to go to the library, a day to get on Goodreads and research authors. Maybe you like series and you figure if I'm going to read 5 books, I want to read a series of books. And you're going to get on Goodreads and search what is a series that's out there that's in a genre I enjoy that has 5 books already published that I can get my hands on. All of those are actionable. Schedule the time to read. Those are all actionable things that you can do to get toward that goal. And that, I really needed to see those things compared to each other for me to get a little more clarity on how I can make that switch. Let's see, and he talks about focusing on doing everything within your control to help something succeed. Because that's really all we can do, right? Nobody could ask more of you than that. You can't ask more from yourself than that. So that's where our focus should be. Page 195 is radiance, and he talks about radiance being like your influence rippling out from you. And I love that it's called radiance. I just think that's a beautiful word for it. On page 196, he says, the nature of our radiance is often a reflection of what's going on inside. It's why cultivating self-awareness, far from being selfish, is vitally important. And in practice, he talks about self-compassion, and this reminded me of, in the What's Your Why Not series, talking about forgiving yourself. Why would I speak to a loved one the way I speak to myself? Like we just got done talking about, would I ever speak to anyone the way I speak to myself? If I wouldn't, then I need to stop talking to myself that way, right? He also talks about deliberate learning on page, let me find it, 201. Talks about the best way for your radiance to serve others is to challenge yourself to grow. To that end, make deliberate learning an ongoing focus of your life. And I love reading that because that's kind of how I'm wired. I'm always thirsting to learn more. It's just the way I've always been. That's part of what I love about planner people, because so many of you are like that also. You're kind of lifelong learners, right? And that made me feel so much better because I'm not the only one. So he talks about that is the best way for your radiance to shine to others. So it's not selfish. Maintaining your radiance is one of the least selfish things you can do, because it makes you feel better inside, which means you put a better self out to others and influence them, which can change their radiance in the way that they can influence others. And it's a humongous ripple effect based on positivity, which I love. Positivity and learning, like you can't go wrong in my head. Let's see, what is next? We are getting to the end of this section, guys. Page 203 is endurance. And this one also highlighted and stars. He talks about meaning can reveal itself in the most unremarkable, unpredictable, and quiet of moments. The music in the mundane. Oh my goodness. Like, at least in our situation here, I feel like a lot of what I do is pretty mundane, right? Mike travels a lot. You know, the kids are in and out, they have their chores, don't get me wrong, but I am the parent who's home the most. I do a lot of mundane stuff. You know, I either do the chores or I delegate the chores, and then I make sure the ones that I delegated got done. And I talked about this before when I spoke at the BWWPC conference, not last October, but the October before. Like, I have a house full of boys. I don't know what it is, but they all just like to take a sock off. They're all one sock kids. Even the older ones, they'll just like take a sock off and just leave it. So there are days at the end of the day I'll walk through my living room and there'll be like 5 random socks scattered throughout the living room. And I just want to get so frustrated. But you know what? There is music in the mundane if you look for it. You know, that is my opportunity to go, hey, you guys, come pick your stuff up, you know, be more responsible. Or if I'm the only one here and I have to fold a massive load of towels or something, you know, that is my chance for a little bit of gratitude. It's a pause in my day that can be calm. I hate folding towels, okay? But it is a pause in my day where I can be calm. I can put something on and listen to it. I can put an audiobook on and listen to it, listen to a podcast. If I'm, you know, watching or rewatching like a TV series, I can put that on. I can just have quiet and have that going while I fold those towels, right? And be thankful that we own towels. We have a house that has a closet to put the towels in. We have running water to wash the towels, right? Like, there are a million things to be grateful for when it comes down to a load of towels. So that's what he's talking about in the endurance section, is finding that music in the mundane things you do. And he talks about a clarity log starting on page 205. It's not about positive thinking, it's about systematically analyzing your efforts to define their purpose. That's in the middle of page 206. And that is, you know, the idea of how he puts it is becoming mindful of why we're doing what we're doing. You know, why am I doing some of these mundane things? Well, I'm taking care of my children. You know, I'm supporting my husband. I'm whatever the case may be, right? And yes, there are mundane things in everybody's life, you know, but they can help you see things to be grateful for as well if you're looking. And that's the trick, is you have to look. Let's see what's next. Deconstruction, starting on page 209. I'm not going to go a whole lot into this section except for to talk about the idea of the 5 whys. So he talks about when you have to, I don't know the best way to put this. Like, you have a problem, okay? So you're gonna name the problem. So here's my problem. Now ask yourself why, and then answer why. Now again, why? Answer why. 5 times, 5 different reasons why that problem exists. Because in defining the problem that deeply over and over and over, you can't repeat answers. It helps you kind of focus solely on that problem in a way that feels manageable. It's on paper, you're writing by hand, and those can give you, those answers to those whys can then give you tasks that can maybe mitigate that problem that you started with. Okay, so he talks about this a lot deeper, page 212 and 213, because that will then give you a plan of attack. So answering those whys then can give you actionable items to do to circle back around and deal with that problem. Kind of repeating myself, sorry guys. Let's see, page 217 is inertia, and he talks about one of my favorite things in here. It's called rubber ducking. So he says, when you're in a situation where you're spinning your wheels, this is on page 218 in the center, if we can explain the problem in detail to someone or something else, we have to change our perspective, right? Because we are immersed in this problem, whatever the problem may be. But I know sometimes for me I need a sounding board, so I'll tell my husband, like, I need to talk to you about something. Let me run this by you, or I'm stuck. I will look at him a lot and go, hey, can you listen for a minute? I'm stuck. And he'll be like, sure, what's up? I just need to explain it out loud to someone else who isn't so immersed in whatever the situation is, because when you're explaining it so that somebody who's not immersed in that problem can understand it, you have to change your perspective on whatever it is you're immersed in. Instead of being, you know, neck deep in it, you take a step back and out of it. So he talks about writing a letter to a rubber duck. If I have to explain this problem to this rubber duck, how would I explain it? And when you're viewing that from back and away, instead of from being neck deep, you gain some objectivity and you gain some perspective. So he says, talk about, you're going to write a letter to whatever, you know, the umbrella or whatever the case may be. Your problem, what's not working, why it isn't working, what you've tried, what you haven't tried yet, and what you want to have happen. And in the process of carefully communicating the problem, you may help yourself figure out a solution, he says at the top of page 219. And then after that, he talks about break sprints, which are basically kind of a way to get your mind unstuck if you're on your way toward a goal and you find yourself stuck, okay? So he says the rules for break sprints should be that a break sprint should take 2 weeks or less to complete. It should be unrelated to the project or problem that's troubling you. And very critically, number 3, it needs to have a defined end and a clear beginning and middle too, okay? So if you're heading toward a goal and you are just freaking stuck and you can't figure out how to get out of it, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a week and I am going to take an online class that has nothing to do with this. I am going to take 2 days away from this problem and I'm going to submit a guest post to somebody's blog. Whatever the case may be, he talks about how that can kind of shift your perspective, get out and away from that problem, so when you come back to it, you do have a more fresh perspective on it. In the wind turned my page on me. Page 222, he talks about imperfection. Oh my goodness. He says perfection is an unnatural and damaging concept in the middle of page 223. And middle of page 224, he puts this beautifully. Perception sabotages potential. And there's going to be a whole other separate video on this as well. I've been actually planning a video for a long time about how perfection does not equal quality. And this just even made my brain go with like a million ideas to build on from what I've already started writing for that video. So he talks about how finding beauty in the imperfection, because there's imperfection all around us. Nothing is perfect and no one is perfect, and that's all there is to it, right? You want things to be done as well as you can possibly do them. Don't get me wrong. But chasing perfection can let you get stuck, right? If I wanted my videos to be absolutely perfect, I never would have made any. I never would have made the first one, and I would never have made any since, because they're never up to what I want them to be. You know, it's hot out, there's too much wind, you know, it's hot enough that everybody went inside, so now I'm gonna record out here because it's noisy in there, or it's cloudy, so there's not good lighting, or, you know, when Liam was littler, he's climbing all over me like a piece of furniture. All these things that are imperfect about those videos, yes, but those are also real life, like that's real life. It's either that or I don't make a video. Right? So I had to try to embrace the things that were imperfect about those videos and find, or not even find, but be more attached to the joy and the happiness that I get from being able to converse with you all about the topics that were in those videos, because that's why I like to do videos. Does that make sense? So he talks in a greater detail about this in the book, going into, you know, page 226, 227, and talking about, you know, a lot of times isn't self-improvement or personal development trying to be perfect? Isn't that chasing perfection? And he does say maybe, but it depends on the goals that you set. You know, I don't know, I always want to be better than I was, right? Like as I go through life, I want to be better than I was. I want to be more open. I want to be more teachable. I want to be more patient. You know, all these things that you want in your life for your life to have meaning. I want to be better at chasing those things now than I was, say, 20 years ago. So, but at no point is it going to be perfect. At no point am I going to be perfect. Far from it. And he talks about embracing that and how that is okay. So at the very end, on page 228, he says, every action is a step up from where you were. It doesn't matter how small the steps are or if you stumble along the way. What matters is that you continue to step up. And so I've tried to shift my mindset, like that's not chasing perfection. That's embracing change. It's a whole different thing. So that is it. I cannot believe we briefly made it through section 3. Now, like I said, I will be revisiting this section going into August and September and hopefully doing some collab videos on some of these topics. I've already got some of that in the works. So the next video will be section 4 and 5. Actually, section 5 in the book is pretty short. So section 4 is the art. So there will be that video. It will probably be going up within the next day or two because this one is so late. So thank you all for your patience. Thank you for playing along. I've really had fun talking to everybody on Instagram and here on YouTube during the read along. If you have anything to add to this, please by all means let me know. I will link to what we talked about down below, and I'll be back with section 4 of the Bullet Journal Method by Ryder Carroll. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.